Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there. Welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. Today, I want to talk about Sandtray miniatures. As a play therapist, you've probably heard about Sandtray therapy. And the question that comes up all the time when I'm doing trainings is, what kind of miniatures should I get? And if you are watching live, you may notice my background has changed a little bit. Typically in the video, you can, if you're watching by the video, the live stream video or the live stream replay, you've probably seen all of the miniatures in my background. I actually now have a new Sandtray training space in St. George, Utah. So I moved over the weekend. I moved all of my Sandtray miniatures to my new space so that I can do a lot more in-person Sandtray trainings. And I like to keep my Sandtray trainings a little on the small side, just so we really get a chance to get in, hands dirty, deep down into the processing and identifying themes and how do you process those themes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my upcoming training. For those of you who are interested, I have a training coming up next month in July. And so you'll want to stick around for that. But I have changed my background a little bit. You can see I typically have, in the past, I've had all my miniatures, so you could see how I organize them and how I display them on the shelves. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And today I really want to focus on the miniatures and helping you figure out what kind of miniatures you need for your Sandtray collection. If you're a play therapist, then you've probably heard of Sandtray therapy, and you may have already started using it yourself or wondering about it and wondering about those miniatures. Like I always had people walk into my office where I had all my Sandtray miniatures, because I had my play therapy space and my office were all the same. I didn't have a separate playroom at the time. And people would look at my miniatures and take a step back and go like, whoa, because it looks like I have a bunch of little figurines, and I have like this unhealthy attraction to collecting miniatures. And then I usually would have to explain, oh, those are for Sandtray. They have a specific therapeutic purpose. Just like if people are kind of looking at your playroom, wondering why a grown-up has a lot of toys in their office, we like to explain about play therapy. And the thing about play therapy is, as a play therapist, you're choosing your toys intentionally. Whatever toys and supplies you have in your playroom, they have a specific therapeutic purpose. So when play therapists asks, like, what kind of miniatures, if they're just getting started, what kind of Sandtray miniatures should I have in my playroom? It can be a little overwhelming, especially when you think about the financial investment. So it makes a lot of sense why ask this question, because you know that just like the toys in your playroom have a specific therapeutic purpose, you know the sand tray miniatures also have a specific therapeutic purpose. So you want to choose them intentionally. One, to save yourself some money in the beginning, because it can be a little expensive and a little overwhelming in the beginning, but also just to save some time, making sure you get sand tray miniatures that are going to have the therapeutic value for your clients. So that is what we are going to talk about today. If you're watching live, I would love to know who's here, where you're from, what population you work with. Are you using sand tray? What questions do you have about choosing sand tray miniatures? Feel free to post that in the comments. If you're watching the live replay, also feel free to post your name, where you're from, what population you work with. I love reading the comments. And for those of you listening on the podcast, honestly, feel free to post questions or to email me. And I would love if you would leave a review. I like to get the feedback, make sure the topics are helpful. And I just kind of am nerdy that way. I like interacting with my play therapy people in my community. So if you find the information helpful, also please feel free to share it and pass it along to your colleagues who might also be interested. So today, alrighty, so full disclosure for those of you watching the live stream, my husband has now left for work, and the likelihood I'm going to have some dogs in my office pretty soon is probably very high, because you just open the door to let them in so they don't scratch. So you may see, usually what you can see in the background is you'll see my bigger dog, Luna. You'll see her little tail. It's like a little flag. You might see her in the background. Sometimes I see that when I'm doing some video edits to chop these videos up. Anyway, so sand tray miniatures. So first, what's the purpose of sand tray miniatures? The purpose of the sand tray miniatures is that they're actually symbols. So they allow access to your client's unconscious. I would also say, from a neuroscience and attachment standpoint, they allow access to those implicit memories, those memories and experience filled with emotions and thoughts and responses. Those, if we're looking at it from a Jungian standpoint, we're looking at the complexes around those archetypes, really accessing those areas that need healing. So the theory model is, given the free and protected space, clients have an intrinsic desire for healing and wholeness. So given that free and protected space, clients will move towards healing and wholeness. So the sand tray miniatures are the symbols that they use to work through whatever it is that they're working through. And they can use these miniatures to manipulate them in ways that are meaningful, to help them engage in that deep healing. It's kind of a way of bypassing, I call it a way of bypassing those frontal lobes, those cognitive areas that need to fully understand before we can do anything. I have to cognitively articulate to you. And that's hard to do, especially for children, because they haven't necessarily developed, depending on the age of the child, which we're talking more about adolescence. It's hard for children to articulate those deep meanings. Think about it. It's hard for grown-ups to do that. I've worked with tons of grown-ups. If I'm working with grown-ups, I'm typically also using the sand tray, because especially if there's trauma and attachment wounds, because I find it's a really good way to explore that, to get at those in a deeper way. Let's see, we have a comment. So we have Diane from Maryland. I work as a clinical director at the Laurie Center School, a special education elementary school for students with emotional and behavioral. That is where I started out. My not at the center where you are. This was back in the 1980s. I was a special education teacher with emotional and behavioral problems. So I was on the education side, which, to be honest, is where I got introduced to play therapy, and did a play therapy group with the school psychologist who was learning this play therapy thing. And that's actually where I got hooked. Special education has come a long way since the 1980s, and in some ways, kind of still the same. But welcome. That's awesome. That is a really awesome population to work with. I use sand tray, although my collection is still small. Yeah, and it'll build. It will definitely build over time, and that's what I want to talk about today, because I think people, I know in the beginning I worried about this too. In the beginning, we worry we're not going to have the right miniatures, and that's going to impede progress and healing for our clients. I haven't necessarily found that to be true. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. All righty. So that's, I think it's important to understand what the purpose of the miniatures are, so that when you're cultivating your sand tray miniature collection, you're kind of understanding why you're getting certain miniatures that you're getting. Okay, so full disclosure, both my dogs are now in my office. Lily, my little dog, is under my desk at my feet, and Luna, the bigger dog, she heard me say her name. She's kind of hanging out. Since Luna's in the room, if you hear any strange sounds in the background that sound like something questionable might be going on in the background, the likelihood it's Luna digging in my carpet is pretty high. I don't know why she feels the need to dig in my carpet, but it is a regular occurrence. Or what she does is she rolls around on the back and and moans and then digs. So if you hear any of that, then it might be that you're probably hearing my dog Luna in the background. All righty, back to sand tray miniatures. So that's the purpose. So one of the things, like when I do sand tray trainings, I really love to keep it small so that people are really having access to the sand tray miniatures. They're having access to placing them and moving them and manipulating them in the sand, and that kind of sensory experience of the whole sand tray making process, with making your own sand trays in the sand with your colleagues, and then we process those. Because I feel like you really get the purpose of the miniatures, and you get the depth that occurs in the sand tray making process. So that's one of the reasons I like to keep my sand tray training small, and I like to do them in person, because I feel like that sensory experience and that experience of how you can think you're choosing miniatures, your clients will do this too, where they're like, I'm just going to put these down. And then as you're processing it and learning to identify themes and what's going on, we go a little deeper in the trainings than we would necessarily with our clients. But you really get a sense of how that unconscious, or if we're using neuroscience, then how those implicit memories and that mentalization process unfolds in the sand tray. It's really powerful. So that is the purpose of the sand tray miniatures. So let me just do an overview of the different categories that you probably want to focus on. And just like in the playroom, play therapists are going to get specific kind of categories for the therapeutic value of the toys and supplies. It's the same thing with the miniatures. There are certain categories that we're looking for that have therapeutic value to them to access those therapeutic powers of play, which can be access to the unconscious, kind of reworking and challenging some cognitive distortions, really problem solving, all of those things, especially if you're doing some directive activities with your clients, you can use that to do a lot of that restructuring and kind of looking at changing those distorted beliefs, examining what's in there, the unconscious, what is in there, reworking it. So having certain categories of miniatures is really useful. And here's the thing, there's a lot of categories, there's a lot of miniatures. If you can choose at least a few from each category, then that will at least give you kind of a starting point with your clients, or just start with a few categories and build onto that. The reality is your clients will get what they need. They will figure out how to get what they need in the process while you're building your collection. So don't really stress out about that. All right. So the first category is really people. I tend to not recommend getting the, what would I call them? They would be like the kind of vocational people, the people that are realistic in terms of different jobs. You can get those later. Kids don't use those as much. But what they do use are pirates, they use medieval knights, they use babies, they use brides and grooms. If you can get the brides and grooms separate, that's even better. You know how like the cake toppers, I don't know if they're still making cake toppers this way, I assume they are. But they would have the bride and the groom kind of connected. But if you can get those separate, then that's even more helpful, because when you're working with children whose parents are divorced, brides and grooms are typically symbolic of parents for children. For adults, it might be something different. But for children, it typically represents parents. So if you're working with children whose parents are divorced or separated, or maybe they were never married and they've always lived in two different households, it's helpful to see how children use those miniatures. Getting babies, superheroes and villains. A lot of the Disney characters, like right now, the big miniatures coming out is the whole Inside Out 2 movie. So I love seeing those posts on social media of play therapists who are going out and purchasing the Inside Out. I feel like play therapists keep the Disney and Pixar as far as like their promotional and their like little toys they sell. I feel like we keep them in business as much as the kids. So the other thing is You always want to make sure that you have a representation of different cultures. I feel like now with a lot of the things coming out and some of the cartoon type movies, we do get a much better representation of different cultures in the stories being told. So it's nice having those different representations of culture. The other is animals. And I always say, if you're just getting started, like people, get the different people like pirates. Yep, you can hear Luna behind me scratching. Um, get those kind of representations that your clients would probably use. Also, animals, zoo animals, jungle animals, farm animals, domestic animals of, and if you can even get animals of different, like lions, get representations that can be used for family, like the parent animal size and then baby animal size. Children will, that's an even I for lack of a better word, even a better way to keep some psychological distance while for your clients to work through some of those issues that may be going on for them, like attachment issues or trauma issues, things like that. You want to get some insects, some sea life, different things like that. If you can get some, I call it vegetation, like trees or bushes. A lot of times, like with the animals, you get jungle animals, you can get those um, like kits of animals where they'll have trees and maybe some fences as well. So the packs of different animals and that comes with trees. Trees are a little harder to get. You may want to go on Amazon to get a pack of those. Maybe some bush, if you're in, get cactus, if you have access to those, flowers, things like that. And buildings, at least a couple of houses to start with. If you can get something representing a school, especially if you're working with kids, or a hospital or something like that, maybe a lighthouse, something like that, at least a couple of those. A castle, a fort, a TB, or a church, or some kind of religious building. If you can get one or two of those, that's always helpful. Getting some fences and signs. So getting some fences, if you get some construction people, oftentimes that will come with some barriers and some signs. Those are useful. Getting some fantasy or mythical, like wizards or fairies, dragons, things like that. Spiritual. If you're it depends on your like if you're just getting started and you're like, I can't get all of these, you can hold off on getting the spiritual unless you work with a population where that's a very important thing. If that's the case, you might want to at least get one or two things that represent the religious practice of the clients that you serve. Vehicles and transportation, like cars and trucks. Police, if you work with a population that is court involved and maybe justice involved with like police, or maybe you work with clients who are domestic violence population, the likelihood they've encountered police, or your population, you serve a lot of children from families that where parents or family members may struggle with addiction and they may have some legal issues due to their addiction, then it's always helpful to get maybe a police car, or firefighters and maybe a firefighter truck or something like that. Creepy and scary. If you can get creepy and scary, that's always helpful. So because these are representative of the things that, like anxiety and fear, danger, the things that we're trying to work through. to use a Jungian term, we're working through shadow. So this would be really helpful to get some of at least a few of those. Here in the United States, and probably I know outside of the United States, a lot of other countries celebrate Halloween. So coming up, probably maybe starting in August or September, definitely by October, because here in the US, October is when we celebrate Halloween. You can get those Halloween villages with the creepy trees and the bear trees. You want to get some of those. You could get some tombstones. If you can find tombstones, I would definitely get tombstones, because that, for children who are working through grief, those are really useful to have. And then also like some natural things, if you can, like rocks or seashells, twigs. These you can probably go out in nature and find some of these. So these are most likely available to you for free. If you can get some little crystals or jewels or something, that's also helpful. And then finally, any like landscaping items, like a bridge or a wishing well. If you can get a bridge and at least one bridge and at least one wishing well, that's always helpful. And at least a treasure box, and then if you can get a volcano or fire, that's always a bonus. Having some of like one or two of those in there would be useful. So I know that feels like a lot, these categories, especially in the beginning. But if you just get a few from each category, you can build over time. So that brings me to my third category for today, which I wanted to talk about: tips for building your collection. Start small and build. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. Your clients will get what they need. So don't get discouraged, because children will figure out what to use in the sand tray to get their needs met in whatever it is they're trying to work through. And this is a lot of what we talk about in the sand tray training is really, especially the sand tray and play therapy with children and adolescents, which is the one I'm going to be doing next month. We'll talk about like suggestions, how to get started, what miniatures do you have? Because a lot of times as you're building and processing sand trays in the training, you're also understanding how the different miniatures are used and the different kind of representations based on how they're being used. So that's a lot of what we look at: how the miniatures are used, what else is used in along with the different miniatures, all of, like really learning how to look at the miniatures and how they're placed and identify the themes that are being represented, which also gives you an idea where your clients are in the change process. Plus, the other benefit of that is we get a little cleaning out for ourselves as therapists. It's always nice to do a little bit of our own work, right? In a safe place. You don't have to, but a lot of people end up doing that, and it's really powerful. It's so cool. I love doing sand tray trainings. And then just be really intentional about your adding to your collection. That's going to help to save money and avoid wasting time and money in the beginning with things that are not necessarily as important as maybe some other things. It might not be a good investment in the beginning. So just some tips to think about for that. So let me do a recap of what we talked about today. So sand tray miniatures really do have a specific function in the playroom, and they are for helping children access those therapeutic powers of play using the sand, a sand tray, and the miniatures. And the miniatures are really those symbols that children are using, and they're grounding those in the sand, in the container of the sand tray. So really allows you to get a sense of the stories that are going on, the beliefs about themselves, others, and relationships, their life experiences, and how they make sense of that, and the meaning they give to it about who they are and life as they begin to figure out how to be resilient in their life. That's the goal, right? Developing resiliency. So choosing the miniatures really needs to be intentional. There are specific types of categories, and I went over and reviewed those categories to think about when you're just getting your collection started and then building onto your collection. And then the third thing is, don't get overwhelmed. Your clients will get what they need. They will figure out how to use the miniatures in the sand, in the sand tray, to work through whatever it is they need to work through. And trust the process. Trust that your clients, if you provide that free and protected space, trust that your clients will be able to get what they need while you're just getting started with your miniature collection. So that is it for today. If you're interested, I do have an in-person sand tray training coming up. It's a 2-day sand tray training in beautiful southern Utah. We go over a lot of like how to make sense of what your clients are doing. How do you recognize themes in the sand tray? What do you do with those themes? What do you say? What do you not say to process the sand tray with your clients while maintaining that free and protected space so that you're not invasive and kind of challenging them to do something they're not quite ready to do? And how do you make sense of what they've created? And how do you use that information to tell where they are in the change process? And we do that by, there's some kind of didactic where I share some information, and then we do a lot of sand trays and processing sand trays over that 2-day period. If you're interested in the training, then pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com. You'll want to click on the courses page. So it's Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training, and the website is rhplaytherapytraining.com. Then click on the courses page, and you'll see all of the information. So I hope to see you there, and I will see you next week. Same time, same place. And if you found the information helpful, please feel free to share the information across your social media. If you're listening on the podcast, I would love to hear your review. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.